Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird, New York to London, in 1 hour. 54 minutes. A commercial flight takes 7 hours. This machine did it in less than 2. But here is the question nobody asks. Why was it built? What was so dangerous, so threatening, that America had to create something that flew faster than a rifle bullet, higher than most missiles could reach, and remained almost completely invisible? This was not an aircraft. This was a calculated response to a world standing at the edge of nuclear destruction, and the secret behind its creation will change the way you think about pressure, power, and what humans do when failure is simply not an option. Welcome to Warplane Mysteries, the channel where the sky is not the limit. It is just the beginning. Now, before we go any further, if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, think of it this way. You know that wise elder in your family, the one above 50, who never misses the morning newspaper. He does not skip a single edition because he knows missing one day means missing something important. Be that person. Press that subscribe button and never miss a single story from Warplane Mysteries. And one more thing. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? Whether you are sitting in New York, Karachi, London, Dubai, or a small town that Google Maps barely knows about, we want to hear from you. The year was 1957. The world was not at war, but it was not at peace either. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were locked in a silent, dangerous competition. A competition not fought with soldiers on a battlefield, but with missiles, secrets, and intelligence. And America was losing the information war. The Soviet Union had just done something that sent shockwaves through every government office in Washington. LA had successfully developed intercontinental ballistic missiles, weapons capable of traveling thousands of kilometers and striking American cities without warning. For the first time in modern history, the United States felt genuinely vulnerable on its own soil. The question was not whether the Soviets had these weapons. The question was, how many did they have? Where were they positioned? And how quickly could they be launched? Without answers to these questions, America was essentially blind. And a blind superpower is a dangerous superpower. The CIA understood this clearly. Knowledge in any conflict is power. And at that moment, America lacked the knowledge it desperately needed. They had tried to solve this problem before. Back in 1955, a plane called the U-2 had been built specifically for spying. It flew at extraordinary altitudes, nearly 20,000 meters above the Earth. American intelligence believed that at this height, Soviet radar simply could not detect it. They were wrong. Soviet radar tracked the U-2 from the very first mission. The only reason it was not immediately shot down was that Soviet missiles had not yet developed the range to reach it at that altitude. But that window was closing fast. On May 1, 1960, the worst happened. A U-2 spy plane was shot down over Soviet territory by a surface-to-air missile. The pilot, Francis Gary Powers, survived, but was captured, put on public trial in Moscow, and paraded in front of the world's media alongside the wreckage of America's most secret aircraft. It was not just an embarrassment, it was a strategic catastrophe. America's most critical intelligence tool had been exposed, captured, and destroyed. The message from Moscow was clear. Your skies are no longer safe. And so, inside the most secretive corridors of American defense, a new question was being asked. If the U-2 is finished, what comes next? The answer would change aviation forever. There is a certain kind of pressure that does not break ordinary men. It reveals them. And in the spring of 1958, inside a small, heavily guarded facility just outside Los Angeles, a group of engineers was about to be revealed for exactly who they were. The CIA had issued a challenge that, by every conventional measure of aviation science, was impossible to meet. They needed a plane that could fly higher than any missile could reach, faster than any radar could track, and remain virtually invisible to enemy detection systems. All three requirements. Simultaneously, in a single aircraft, no such machine existed anywhere on Earth. But one man believed it could. His name was Kelly Johnson. To understand what Johnson meant to American aviation, one must understand the kind of mind he possessed. He did not simply design aircraft. He reimagined what aircraft were allowed to be. His colleagues described him the way historians describe Leonardo da Vinci, a man who did not see the boundary between what existed and what was possible. Johnson had been with Lockheed since 1933. He had already built the iconic F-104 starfighter. He had already created the U-2. But this new challenge, Project Archangel, was something of an entirely different magnitude. He assembled a small, elite team. No bureaucracy, no endless committees, no corporate delays. Just sharp minds, slide rules, and a shared obsession with solving the unsolvable. They called themselves the Skunk Works. Over 11 intense months, the Skunk Works team drafted 10 separate designs, each one labeled with the letter A for Archangel. Some achieved extraordinary speed, others reduced radar visibility. But every single design failed to deliver all three requirements at once. The frontrunner was the A-10. It could fly at Mach 3 to more than 3 times the speed of sound. It soared at altitudes the Soviets could barely dream of reaching. But its shape made it glaringly visible to radar, like a lighthouse in a dark ocean. The CIA was not impressed. The contract and the future of the entire program hung by a thread. And then, one quiet engineer, sitting with an existing blueprint, made a single, decisive modification. He flattened the underbelly. He streamlined the fuselage. He redirected radar waves away from enemy receivers, instead of back toward them. The result was a 90% reduction in radar cross-section, from a massive target to the profile of a large bird in flight. It was not luck. It was not accident. It was the product of a team that had been told failure was not permitted, and simply refused to fail. The CIA approved a $96 million contract on February 11, 1960. The world's most extraordinary spy plane was now officially under construction. But what nobody knew yet was that building it would prove almost as dangerous as flying it. There is a price for building something that has never existed before, and that price is never just money. It is paid in sleepless nights, failed experiments, broken systems, and sometimes in human lives. The Skunk Works team had won the contract. They had convinced the CIA. They had silenced the skeptics. But now came the part that no blueprint could prepare them for: actually building it. The first problem was the airframe itself. At Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, the friction generated by air alone would heat the aircraft's exterior to over 300 degrees Celsius. Aluminum, the standard material of every aircraft built before this moment, loses its structural integrity at just 150 degrees. For the SR-71, aluminum was not even a conversation. The only material on Earth capable of surviving those temperatures, while remaining light enough for supersonic flight, was titanium. Rare, extraordinarily difficult to machine, and almost entirely controlled by the Soviet Union, the very enemy they were building this plane to spy on. What followed was one of the most quietly audacious procurement operations in Cold War history. The CIA purchased Soviet titanium through a carefully constructed network of dummy companies, shell corporations, and false identities. The Soviets sold the raw material themselves, completely unaware that their greatest adversary was using it to build the most sophisticated weapon ever aimed against them. But acquiring titanium was only half the battle. Working with it was another world entirely. Titanium damaged standard machining equipment. It resisted conventional manufacturing processes. It behaved unlike any material engineers had worked with before. New tools had to be invented. New techniques had to be created from scratch. Mid-project, under extreme secrecy, against an impossible deadline. And still, the challenges kept coming. At supersonic speeds, metal expands under intense heat. The aircraft's panels needed to fit loosely on the ground, so they would seal tightly only when the plane reached operating temperature at altitude. The result was an aircraft that literally leaked fuel while sitting on the runway. Pilots and ground crews would watch JP-7, a specially formulated exotic fuel developed exclusively for the Blackbird, slowly pooling beneath the aircraft before every single flight. A problem so unusual, so specific to this one machine, that it had no precedent in aviation history. Then came January 1966. Test pilot Bill Weaver and reconnaissance specialist Jim Swire climbed into the cockpit for what should have been a routine performance flight at 24,000 meters. Traveling at Mach 3.2, one engine surged without warning. Within 2 seconds, the aircraft began to disintegrate around them. Weaver was pulled from the cockpit by G-forces so violent, his pressure suit inadvertently acted as a parachute. He survived, falling from the very edge of space, conscious, alone, and uncertain whether anything would open above him. Jim Swire was not as fortunate. His neck broken at the moment of disintegration. He was gone before the wreckage reached the ground. One man returned, one man did not. And yet, the program continued. Because the engineers understood something that is deeply uncomfortable to acknowledge. Perfection always demands a payment. The only question is, who writes the check? There is a particular kind of power that does not announce itself loudly. It does not march through city streets, does not fire warning shots. It simply appears above you. Silent, untouchable, watching, and by 1967, that power had a name. The SR-71 Blackbird entered full operational service from Beale Air Force Base, California. The pilots selected to fly it were not ordinary men. They were the absolute finest aviators the United States Air Force could produce, hand-picked, rigorously trained, and fully aware that the machine beneath them operated at the absolute boundary of what physics permitted. At Mach 3, the Blackbird flew faster than a rifle bullet. Its engines, the most powerful of their era, produced 160,000 horsepower, consuming 3,000 cubic meters of air every single second, an amount equivalent to 2 million people breathing simultaneously. It cruised at 25 kilometers above the Earth, so high that pilots could see the curvature of the planet beneath them, and stars above them in the middle of the day. No weapon system on Earth could touch it. The Soviets tried. They developed the MiG-25 jet fighter specifically to bring the Blackbird down. Surface-to-air missiles were fired at it over hostile territory. In August 1981, over the Korean Peninsula, a Soviet-made guided missile locked onto a Blackbird and launched. The crew had less than 50 seconds. Pilot Maury Rosenberg did not panic. He did not maneuver desperately. He simply accelerated. The missile could not recalculate fast enough. It detonated harmlessly, less than 1.5 miles away. At Mach 3, that was 2 seconds from impact. Not a single SR-71 was ever lost to enemy fire. In its operational lifetime, the Blackbird flew reconnaissance missions over Vietnam, the Middle East, North Korea, and dozens of other global flashpoints. It delivered intelligence that shaped presidential decisions, prevented miscalculations, and arguably kept the Cold War from becoming something far darker. It did not carry bombs. It carried information, and in the modern world, information has always been the most decisive weapon of all. Then, in March 1990, without ceremony, without adequate explanation, the program was shut down. Budget pressures, the rising influence of satellites, institutional impatience with expensive complexity. Months later, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and the one system commanders desperately needed was the system they had just retired. The lesson was not subtle. Nations, like businesses, frequently abandon their most irreplaceable assets, precisely at the moment those assets are most needed, not out of malice, but out of short-term thinking, dressed up as strategic logic. The Blackbird did not fade because it failed. It was retired because the institutions around it stopped believing in the value of the irreplaceable, and that is perhaps the most important business lesson this aircraft ever taught. You do not replace what cannot be replaced with something merely cheaper.